Welcome, devoted movie depressants, to the second episode of the Movie Blues Show. And how fitting for our second episode to be about the mother of all second episodes, the greatest sequel of all time, Aliens. The Empire Strikes Back. Okay, first of all, relax. This isn't going to go the way that you think.
That's awesome!
No, this isn't geek catfishing, nor is the title and thumbnail of this video some kind of clickbait bait and switch. While I'm going to posit that The Empire Strikes Back ruined every movie ever forever, I wouldn't say that this in and of itself is a Star Wars shit take, so apologies up front if that's what drew you in.
Computer says nah.
In fact, if you required some sort of stop and frisk up front, I rather love The Empire Strikes Back. While 70s kids had Star Wars, us 80s babies were raised under the fever of The Empire Strikes Back, and its iconography would litter many of the supplemental pieces of brilliant Star Wars media that would fill the void in between the OT and the prequel trilogy. If you ask me, there's two sequels to Empire. Return of the Jedi, sure, but also Shadows of the Empire, a multimedia Star Wars event from the 90s that pummeled my forming nerd brain with new comics, video games, characters, and toys that bridged the gap between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. And I don't want to hear anyone dismissing Dash Rendar as a Han Solo clone. This man saved the fucking galaxy out of the goodness of his chiseled square heart cavity, whereas Han Solo's motivations were typically just money and pussy, and then he died alone. For me, The Empire Strikes Back is firmly the second greatest Star Wars film of all time, trailing right behind A New Hope. That film only outpaces Empire because of the magnitude of its ingenuity. I mean, one day this universe straight up did not exist, and then George Lucas and a bunch of nerds somehow got Fox to give them millions of dollars to spray paint different colored trash cans in a garage and convinced an old British man that he was a space wizard. And holy shit, it still looks so good. I mean, Empire is gobsmackingly gorgeous at times, but the compositing in this movie, maybe as a result of its larger scope and ambition, just suffers all over the place. And the shitty compositing isn't the only thing to age poorly from Empire, because in about 20 more years from now, they're going to have to dig up Harrison Ford's skeleton to Me Too the shit out of him for spending the entire movie making Carrie Fisher uncomfortable.
Hey, your worship, I'm only trying to help.
Would you please stop calling me that?
Sure, Leia.
You make it so difficult sometimes.
I do, I really do. You could be a little nicer, though. Come on, admit it, sometimes you think I'm all right.
Other than that, Empire Strikes Back is a sumptuous feast, a bold continuation that took risks and slam-dunked emotional beats while absolutely overstuffing this fucking turkey with incredible set pieces, intriguing new characters, and a twist that rocked the entire world to pieces forever. So yeah, like I said, I'm not here to trash Empire as a film, or even as a Star Wars film, ergo, I wouldn't say that this is a bad Star Wars take. If I really wanted to start shit, I'd probably make a video about how Tartakovsky's Clone Wars is better than 70% of Filoni's series, feeling more like an actual war film than Filoni's more kid-friendly universe. This shit is closer to the Battle of Algiers than it is to fucking droids. And yeah, I compared Clone Wars to droids because for some reason a third of that series is one-off episodes about droids getting lost and saving each other and walking through the desert or doing God knows what else. And believe me, that's probably just the tip of my bad Star Wars takes iceberg. Don't make me die on the hill of Rise of Skywalker being maybe the only rewatchable or interesting movie from the sequel trilogy. This movie is about as scattershot and unorganized as The Last Jedi, but for fuck's sake, at least it makes the Force make sense in this one, and both Luke and Leia act more like themselves than they did in either of the Disney dumpster fires. How is it that a video game cutscene CGI Frankenstein monster of Leia feels more like the character than she did flying the fuck around and telling Poe he's a piece of human dog shit from The Last Jedi? And for God's sakes, at least JJ had the good common sense to give a feeling of camaraderie and humor to a Star Wars film after the godforsaken funeral that Rian Johnson gave us. Yeah, so they fly now. I'm sure that feels like a stupid line when you're a Star Wars fan who's owned a jetpack stormtrooper toy since before you had pubic hair. But for this crew, the line is simply a realization of a collective increase of danger as a unit, with Poe reacting with a level-headed wit that's supposed to endear you to his character and make you feel like you're seeing this chase through his perspective as the peril increases. Successfully or not, JJ knew that the audience was supposed to relate to these people first and foremost, not spend time screaming down the halls of their own headcanon about how many other jetpack fucking stormtroopers are in Star Wars. So open up your goddamn mind and have some fucking fun. But that's another video for another day, and I guess as it is, I've delayed things long enough here. So without further ado, let's get into how quite possibly the greatest sequel of all time. No, not that one. No, not that one. No, not that one. Okay, I mean, for sure Crank 2 is the absolute GOAT, but since this is a movie about Star Wars, then the title is going to be How the Empire Strikes Back Ruined All Movies Ever Forever. So far as the history of cinema, or even the history of literature is concerned, the sequel has always been a fairly insidious concept. I won't bother burying the lead here, so case in point, the first film sequel ever produced was The Fall of a Nation, a 1916 film that was a sequel to the positively notorious film Birth of a Nation. Yes, that Birth of a Nation, known as the most reprehensibly racist film in Hollywood history, in which the KKK is portrayed as a heroic force out to protect the sanctity of American values, so basically gross racism masquerading as nationalism, something that surely no longer exists. The sequel was rushed into production under a different director in order to cash in on the controversy and popularity of the first film. But even 200 years before the first vile film sequel was produced, the world of popular literature hit its zenith in the early 1700s with the wildfire invention of the printing press.
You're a whore, Sheila, and I'm gonna make sure everybody knows it!
Popular books at the time, such as Gulliver's Travels and Robinson Crusoe, spawned waves of sequels under different authors, born from the love of money with diminishing returns all around. There is a vast, greedy, and seemingly unending thirst for sequels in Hollywood history. And more often than not, there are common threads among these films where a lack of respect is shown to the original team from the first film by a studio that just wants to create a profitable film as soon as humanly possible. Directors change, budgets change, and lead actors are swapped out and discarded in favor of speed and profitability. And for a while, it seemed as if film sequels would be a wholly unsuccessful gambit from a critical, moral, and quality point of view. It was always going to be something like Frankenstein's Bride Sister, but then a little rascal with the hair of an Adonis blessed us on this very earth. And that man, that fucking genius, is George goddamn Lucas, baby. George is a once-in-a-lifetime genius, a Walt Disney, ironically, a Picasso. This man has blessed the cultural lexicon forever with nearly everything he has touched, even the really terrible shit. But not this CGI movie he did in the 2000s. What in the fuck was the deal with this? Has a person on Earth even truly seen this movie? Let me know.
Sound the alarm!
The potion's dangerous.
It destroys order. I want it!
You should see your face. Wait, I can show you.
George Lucas's iconic legacy was the product of a twofold unleashing of genius that would change pop culture forever. On one hand, we have the genius boy savant who invented Star Wars out of fucking egg crates and probably cocaine, all while wearing the smartest flannel imaginable. A man who invented the most beautiful, heartfelt, endearing, and loving universe of characters that raised entire generations of children into mouth-breathing, generally unwell, maladjusted adults. And then on the other hand, George's genius has a dark side. Born of the same follies that plagued all of the sequel makers, lore expanders, and franchise violators since the first run of the printing press. George was a businessman. And when it came to the business of Star Wars in the early 80s, business was f***ing booming, baby! George was reveling in the ability to commercialize, conglomerate, and synergize Star Wars into a three-headed Ghidorah of financial success. Lucasfilm and Industrial Light and Magic both sprang from the wildfire reception of Star Wars and seemingly demanded Lucas's focus during the years following A New Hope. So when the public's clamoring for a sequel to the biggest sci-fi hit of all time reached a fever pitch, businessman George knew he needed to deliver, but also knew that he had to keep his priorities in line. And those pre-Empire priorities were, for lack of a better term, expanding his empire. Gone was the starry-eyed, hopeful Lucas the filmmaker, and in his place rose the turkey-necked business shark who would monopolize popular entertainment for decades to come. Despite its quality, despite its genius, The Empire Strikes Back is the first true taste of Lucas's sequelist, franchise lord mindset. Empire was handled lovingly by a different director, Irving Kershner, as well as different writers, bringing in the legendary Lawrence Kasdan to translate Lucas's ideas into an actual product. Lucas did this to best position himself to be able to broker deals, design merchandise, and finish moving ILM to San Francisco so that he could establish his mega empire. From this admittedly reductive but factually logical point of view, there is nothing to separate The Empire Strikes Back from the many bad faith sequels that came before it. Ostensibly, it is a film that was clearly made out of supply and demand overload, as is evident by the interviews with the producers of A New Hope, who clearly had no idea if the franchise would even continue to begin with.
And what about sequels? The producer of Star Wars, Gary Kurtz.
We had a lot of speculation about sequels to Star Wars, and we are working on story material that will develop into potentially one or more motion pictures that will use the same characters. I like to consider them different adventures rather than direct sequels.
Things like this reinforce the fact that Empire was less of an original voice bursting through the void like A New Hope was, instead representing a deeply calculated product that emerged from the world's fever over Star Wars. After all, and from a story perspective, there really wasn't anything hanging over the head of A New Hope that desperately needed a follow-up. No real sequel bait is given or dangled in front of the audience after the Death Star is annihilated and Darth Vader is sent spinning off into space with his pet project and life's evil ambition detonated in front of his face. With Empire being received almost instantly as one of, if not the greatest sequels ever made, the notion was instantly reinforced that if a movie made big bank, then there had to be another. It didn't matter if the director changed, it didn't matter if the story didn't demand it, you gotta give the people what they want.
Do you think this is going to be as big as Star Wars?
Bigger! Yeah. Bigger.
And yet a lot of the critics are panning it.
Well, what do they know?
But shifting from a pure burst of imaginative brilliance into a money-printing factory surely wasn't the only negative maxim enforced by Empire's success. Turns out that there were far more desperate and clawing maneuvers that Empire employed and therefore sanctioned for the rest of movie history as ethically acceptable. The retcon. A sequel maneuver of the most sinister order, putting something, a character or a narrative beat, into a sequel that retroactively changes elements about the original product like it's the fucking photo from Back to the Future. This is a tactic employed and still frequently used by the most devious of franchise builders. This year, we got a new Fast and Furious movie with Jason Momoa where they suggest that the drug lord from the fifth film had a son who witnessed his father's death at the hands of Dom and his family. Not only do they do this kind of shit to create plot threads that don't involve having to come up with an original new concept, but even more nefarious, writers often use retconning to steal the emotional thunder or stakes from another film entirely without having to set up or invent their own. Batman v Superman, for example, in its only worthwhile scene besides the one where Batman slaughters a group of people like a school shooter, is the retconned Battle of Metropolis opening, where they suggest that Bruce Wayne didn't bring his bat plane or his grappling gun to work as he runs through the streets in a very smart vest. But this chaos isn't even earned from this god-awful movie, it's literally the culmination of another film's plot. Retconning is basically the movie version of Stolen Valor.
First class, really?
Yeah.
Okay, and where's your pants, man?
My pants? They're right here, bro.
No, your army pants.
Oh, this Casual Friday. You know, it's allowed in my unit to we're allowed to walk around with just our jackets.
That's it?
So, in case anything goes on, I'm ready. I'm ready fresh. I'm ready to take those enemies down.
It's sloppy and leaves all kinds of paradoxical plot holes in its wake. And there honestly is no greater granddaddy of retconning than the Vader twist. I mean, the likelihood of this being a retcon is so strong that if it weren't, Lucas would have to admit that he made two twin siblings kiss.
There are questions that still need to be answered. Like, what about the future of the princess?
And who she is going to end up with is still anybody's guess. I will say that Luke is more devoted to her, I think, than Han Solo is.
I would probably describe Han Solo as the cynical, mercenary space pirate with the cream filling, He's a nice guy.
She's really a chump if she goes for Han Solo.
So either George Lucas is the grandfather of stepbrother porn, or he has no fucking idea what he was doing with these movies. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings me to a smoldering Star Wars hot take, a huge turd that I need to push out immediately here that has gotten me into hot water multiple times with Star Wars nerds. And that is that all the people who say, oh, JJ's sequel trilogy was terrible because they didn't have a plan. Well, maybe that was a sentiment lifted from the OT.
JJ, what happened to Darth Vader's grandchildren?
Oh, George. This is great. You tell me, man. You made all this shit up.
Because these movies absolutely did not have a plan until about halfway through the game or more, and if that somehow offends your delicate sensibilities over your precious movies, then you can go chug green milk in hell.
There's of course a very famous scene in The Last Jedi where Luke approaches a space walrus and milks it. Then he drinks that milk, and I think there's more there, and I thought it'd be interesting to see what ChatGPT thought of it. ChatGPT explained that the scene where Luke milks the creature can really be analyzed from a psychoanalytic perspective. One interpretation is that the scene is representing his regression through the oral stages of development, which of course references one of Freud's psychosexual stages of human development. Further, the droid explains that Luke is struggling with his identity, and the milk could represent a desire for sustenance and comfort during a difficult time, while also representing a...
Yes, neither trilogy had a plan, but the sequel trilogy arguably should have had one with the time and resources given to get started. My theory is, and it really isn't a theory because it reaches toward borderline objectivity, is that the reason that one trilogy was better than the other wasn't for lack of a plan, but because George Lucas is just a better fucking artist than J.J. Abrams or, my god, especially Rian Johnson.
I mean, it says right in the script, forget the past, kill it if you have to. And you're doing a pretty good job.
I'm trying.
While so many movies have aped the Vader reveal and have desperately tried to retcon their own source films to death, no series of movies has suffered more pain from the Vader retcon reveal than Star Wars itself. The ultimate retcon tragedy, the Vader reveal, was the first domino to trigger a chain reaction of Star Wars retcons. If you're going to argue that The Empire Strikes Back didn't ruin movies forever, that's fine, I can probably live with that, and you might be right. But you can't argue that Empire's treatment of its source material didn't send a toxic retcon shockwave throughout the Star Wars history that persists to this very day. After Empire, the expectation for a massive twist was immediately ported to Return of the Jedi, offering up the somewhat groan-inducing mega retcon that Luke and Leia are twins. With Empire's twist being so all-encompassing throughout the pop lexicon, Jedi had to offer up something that could possibly top Empire, because the director probably knew that the rest of the movie was kinda shit. Then we got Star Wars Episode 1, which includes so many bizarre retcons and opens up so many plot disasters that only multiply and persist throughout the trilogy and in between episodes. Now the Force is a science thing and not a faith thing, so becoming a Jedi isn't so much a matter of will in the heart, but the result of, like, blood platelets? Fuck, I don't know. And now Anakin built C-3PO by hand. Neither remembers either knowing themselves until 3PO is eventually getting his mind wiped, only to then get his mind wiped again or something. Before Episode 2's retcons, it's worth mentioning that retcons happened between Episode 1 and 2, such as Darth Maul surviving, something that George Lucas probably didn't initially expect to do when he sawed this bitch in half and threw him down a giant laundry chute. And that's the tip of the iceberg of Clone Wars retcon, which, as a series, functions as a 7-season retcon to explain away the relationships between characters that had next to no weight in the prequel trilogy. By the end of the Clone Wars, we've basically summited the Mount Everest of retcons, and some of these changes carry with them a character assassination level of contradiction. We get Obi-Wan Kenobi, a pillar of Jedi solitude who acts as a foil to Anakin's impulsive love affair in the prequels, having his own secret girlfriend from Mandalore that he never seemed to mention once in either trilogy, and that makes less than zero sense with his portrayal in the rest of the saga. Then we've got the originally stoic and imposing Darth Maul looking like the spider from Gremlins 2, living in a cave eating his own turds and screaming to everyone like a homeless lunatic. Arguably the most popular retconned addition to the canon is Filoni's Ahsoka Tano, an apprentice of Anakin's who he fully trains across 70 different war zones, and who has an inseparable connection with her master, and who is never mentioned once outside of Filoni's playground. As many plot holes and retcons as Filoni opened up with the Clone Wars, you still see the creative team having to do absolute somersaults to avoid making things even worse. And that's the kind of shit that I just find hilarious. For 7 fucking seasons of the show, they could not put Anakin up against General Grievous in a fight or even put them in the same room. Instead of this being a writing strategy of building narrative tension, the real reason these two never meet face to face is that in episode 3, Grievous remarks that Anakin is shorter than he expected. Yeah. That throwaway line ended up dictating 7 seasons of content. Episode 2 itself is rife with retcons, from the origins of the Stormtrooper to the origins of Boba Fett, eliminating some of the best EU additions about their characters. In the comics and books, Fett is actually Jaster Muriel, a terrifying and imposing madman who is notorious for killing children. This dude was kind of like the Joker of the Star Wars universe until his subsequent neuterings began. First, George retconned him into a little baby that loves his clone daddy and is racist because Mace Windu unalived his papa. And then Filoni and co. retconned that retcon into a soft old man with alopecia who lives for a good bantha ride. And from there, the retcons caused nothing but Star Wars on Star Wars violence. Episode 5 retcons 4, Return of the Jedi retcons 4 and 5, Force Awakens retcons, Jesus Christ, basically everything we know about the Force, about Luke Skywalker, about the result of the victory from Return of the Jedi, and retroactively damages Vader's redemption. Rogue One revealing that the flaw in the Death Star's planning isn't a flaw at all, but instead a purposeful glitch installed by Hannibal Lecter.
Wow, dude.
Then we get the Oppenheimer-sized nuclear blast, the absolute retcon war of episode 7 and 8, which spend both of their runtimes retconning themselves, each other, The Force Awakens, pretty much bukkake The Force Awakens at any given opportunity. The OT, the prequels. I mean, watching The Last Jedi and then Rise of Skywalker back to back is like watching 2 movies square up in a boxing match. You may feel like the room is spinning right now, but I'll remind you that all of this began with Empire. That movie achieved the most impressive retcon and twist in film history, and that twist has hampered every single writer's ability to further the story of Star Wars since that very moment. The entire sequel trilogy, for example, is built out of the charred corpses of bad sequel maneuvers and retcons, erasing the purpose of the Emperor's defeat in every way imaginable, force-feeding an audience in a world in which the actions of the heroes from the OT only led to more war and more evil, with the First Order annihilating more planets than the whole of the Empire did in the original trilogy in one fucking laser blast. And in terms of bad faith sequel making, the sequel trilogy is as guilty as sin. These movies exhibit every horror show tactic from sequel history, from lack of planning to switching directors midstream to disrespecting its own source material with retcons solely concocted to piggyback off the emotional stakes of the trilogy of movies that people actually gave a shit about. If you're wondering why The Force Awakens leans so heavily into the OT structure, it's because JJ and company wanted to not only visually trigger OT fans with member berries, but also duplicate the stakes and emotional moments from those films as well. Many complaints that seem to arise from the Star Wars fanbase are based around how much these films are tied to the story of the Skywalker legacy and family. But if you go back and watch A New Hope in a vacuum, the Skywalker lineage, especially Vader being unrelated to Luke, truly does not matter. In that film, the later explored notion of Rey being a nobody is first introduced about Luke himself, who is a mere moisture farmer trapped on a backwater planet with only his heart, will, and curiosity for adventure leading him to his adventures out in the galaxy. But Empire's reveal closed the door on this wide-open palette, restricting the drama of Star Wars to a series dependent on the Skywalker reveal. Even the sequel trilogy couldn't escape this paradigm, with fans clamoring and then rioting over Rey's origins, and how they needed to be connected to the Skywalker's legacy to retain any kind of stakes or relevance. Hell, in the last fleeting moments of JJ's saga, they literally used the Skywalker's name to draw up interest.
Oh god. No! No! Rey Skywalker.
It's this insistence on copying Empire's success that has time and again pigeonholed the Star Wars series into being this localized shitshow of secret parents and daunting connections to the Skywalker family that won't seemingly end. If any single element of the OT, let alone a single film from the OT, could be blamed for hampering the possibilities found in the Star Wars galaxy, logically it has to be tracked back to the original sins of The Empire Strikes Back. But the revelations from that film and the structure of Empire itself not only pigeonholed the Star Wars series, but also many of the franchise movies outside the Star Wars series. And so the damage rolls on. The Vader reveal clearly set a precedent to sequels everywhere about upping the stakes for the second go-around, even if it causes heavy retconning along the way. But Empire's ultimate success as a film, and one of the reasons it's hailed as the greatest sequel of all time, is also tied to the film's structure and tone. While A New Hope felt like a coming-of-age adventure serial, Empire shifted the series' tone into a darker territory, upping the stakes for the characters involved in shocking and interesting ways. In combination with this tonal shift, Empire made the risky decision to end at a place where all of its characters had their fates, struggles, and purposes thrown asunder. There is a bittersweet yet ultimately unsettling quality to the final moments of Empire, with Luke recovering from perilous injury and our crew separated and subsequently tortured in ways that led directly into cliffhangers. While you could easily dismiss this ending as a simple result of a darker tone, once again George the businessman rears his greedy noggin to reveal the true purpose behind the darker toned second chapters of all trilogies following Empire. Unlike the resolved and celebratory moments at the end of A New Hope, Empire leaves its characters in such an unwieldy and hopeless state that the film requires, no, demands that a sequel be produced. And saying that other films copied this darker shift tone and narrative cliffhanging directly from Empire is an understatement, because if I had $1 for every time I've heard or read blank is the Empire Strikes Back of its franchise, then I'd have about as much money as Lucas himself. Almost every major franchise of films has its Empire, and most of these entries are purposefully the second in a trilogy to ensure returns for the next film by using cliffhangers, a darker tone, and the final act leaving our protagonists in danger. I call this the Empire cocktail, or the Empire elixir if you will. You can find it literally all over the place in blockbuster history. Nolan's The Dark Knight had all three elements of the cocktail, a darker tone, higher stakes, and a third act that leaves our protagonists in a worse state than they started in. Like Empire, this movie knew that it had a guaranteed sequel and structured its plot as such, with the Joker left alive and Batman on the run as a fugitive. And if you think that there wasn't a plan for a third one, then I guess you think that Christopher Nolan wanted to end the Batman saga with Batman fucking getting chased by dogs and driving off into the city, which has now turned against him, hates him for being like a terrorist, basically, and now everyone wants to fucking kill him. His parents' legacy is destroyed. The end. The Matrix Reloaded shoots back a round of the old Empire cocktail with a darker tone forecasted by Neo's Trinity death scene dreams, Empire-level reveals provided by the Architect, and then of course a third act that tears our cast asunder and ends on, you guessed it again, a massive cliffhanger. We got Star Trek Into Darkness, where JJ, aping the second entry in both Star Trek and Star Wars franchises by literally combining what worked about The Wrath of Khan and what worked about The Empire Strikes Back into one movie. Turns out that combination was a lethal speedball of the Empire's elixir that led to this movie needing to get its stomach pumped and attend alcohol class afterward. And if you'll indulge me at this point, because if you've made it this far, surely you are used to indulging me, while I take a moment to once again veer off in a tangent that could probably encompass its own video, so this idea is copywritten now, do not make me come after you. Turns out, oddly enough, the series that is most bound to the curse of the Empire's form and function over the years, besides Star Wars, is Star Trek, which is hampered by its own best sequel. And lo and behold, that sequel, which came out a mere 2 years after Empire, is a darker toned, grittier film than its predecessor, with huge character twists, which include the reveal of Kirk meeting his son. Sound familiar? And of course, the garnish on the Empire cocktail, a third act that sends all of our characters asunder and leaves the crew worse off than they started when they kicked things off. The lingering effects of the Empire cocktail are in fact so strong that they've reverberated the Empire fever through the entire Star Trek series, even to this very day. Much like Star Wars, Star Trek is in a perpetual trap of going from lighthearted entries to dark, gritty, Empire-esque showdowns. Generations was too flat and mildly received, so bam, we got First Contact. Insurrection was too romantic and pedestrian in its smaller scale, lighthearted approach, so bam, we get Nemesis with its grittier plot, a personal battle for Picard, and familial reveals meant to rock the fanbase. even this year we got Picard Season 3, which sought to undo the tremendous, throw-up-inducing disaster of its first 2 seasons by, you guessed it, a darker tone, a showdown with a nemesis who has personal connections to Picard, and, oh yeah, a huge familial reveal. This one is the same series with the same fucking characters, and they're just doing it again. What the fuck?
You can't keep getting away with it! You can't keep getting away with it!
Harry Potter is a series that gradually empired itself into relative oblivion. Prisoner of Azkaban is clearly the best in a series of sequels, and why? Because it's a darker tone, it's a grittier universe, it's full of familial twists and reveals that leave our characters in the third act worse off than they were before. But Harry Potter drank so much of the Empire elixir that the series instantly OD'd, trying to outdark and outdo and out-twist itself with every single entry into the last couple movies in the series are nearly unrecognizable to the first film, mired in disgusting sepia that demands you take it seriously as our main cast mopes their absolute brains out movie after movie, with major character deaths and third act twists leaving our characters, you guessed it, often worse off than they were when they started. Captain America 2 is one of many MCU features to beer bong boof the Empire's elixir. This is clearly the best MCU sequel ever, and maybe the best MCU entry period. And can you guess why? And can you guess why? Because it's dark, it's gritty, the tone is shifted, the stakes are higher. This one even has the reveal revolving around a seemingly unstoppable antagonist, clad in all black, who secretly is connected to our protagonist. And just like in Star Wars, we spend our time in this series trying to watch our main character redeem a villain with a personal connection to our hero because he knows that there's still good left in him because, when the fuck will this madness end? Amazing Spider-Man 2, second in the series, darker tone, huge familial reveals, major character deaths, and a twist ending that leaves our protagonist worse off than he was when he started. Pirates of the Caribbean 2, second in the series again, darker tone, cliffhanger ending, character we all loved is going to be trapped permanently in Davy Jones's chest like it's a slab of the old carbonite, and the film ends with all of our characters worse off than they were before. And just like with Return of the Jedi, this second film in the series ends with the setup of a rescue mission for the rest of the cast in the third film. Infinity War, my favorite Marvel film ever produced, has, my god, you did not see this coming, higher stakes, a darker tone, a third act notorious for ripping its characters apart, and oh my god, is this familiar, leaving its core cast to set up a rescue mission for the following film. Even the fucking low-life Hunger Games series pulled an Empire, with Katniss being injured at the end of the second film. Peeta's life hanging in a cliffhanger balance, and an overall darker film with higher stakes as we learn that all of District 12 has been destroyed by the end of the film. Guardians 2 did a darker tone, familial connections to raise the stakes, and a guy who admittedly loves Star Wars facing off against his father using superpowers he inherited from his father who also had superpowers.
He's already dead.
I feel like this is a fine time to refute one possible answer to all these Empire ripoffs, so let's for one moment combat the devil's advocate elephant in the room. An argument against, well, this entire video's premise is that most trilogies mimic the 3-act structure of most movie scripts or stories. The second act always demands a conflict that will send our characters asunder, only to be redeemed in the third act, or in the case of our study here, the third film in a series. It's classic storytelling that Empire surely did not invent. Well, my first response to that line of reasoning is that every single film I've presented as an example of the Empire elixir came out after the Empire. Go ahead and do your research, internet, and find me these tropes as heavily used and abused before Empire opposed to after. Hell, you could even produce your own video about this list and I'll surely watch it because it'll only be 11 seconds long. All this bullshit clearly started with Empire. The instances of similarity are too many and too specific to be a mere act of coincidence. And while Empire did wonders for the Star Wars Wars series, these Empire copycats have a much more prevalent rate of failure. Their mechanisms of plagiarism are fully transparent, their behind-the-camera talent is dwarfed by the genius of Lucas and company, and the same reason that most of these movies suck ass for copying Empire are the same reasons that even the Disney sequel trilogy sucks ass for copying Empire. Hi everybody, I'm Dan Lyons from the Movie Blues Show, and I'm gonna tell you something that major Hollywood, big frickin' Hollywood ain't gonna tell you. You can actually make a movie sequel without all these fucking elements and not have it be a big old pile of shit. Sure, people like the Russo brothers extrapolated what made the Empire sing and replicated it to great effect. But if you're Hollywood's average idiot, I'm here to break you some very unfortunate news. You are not as smart as George Lucas, ILM, and Lucasfilm from the 80s and 90s, so do not try to make your own Empire Strikes Back, or it may very well ruin your movie. You see, Empire's twists and turns, as I've illustrated before, seemingly limit the franchise's scope, and have continued limiting that scope ever since. Even if the movie was great, even if the twists are great, that's simply what happened as a result. When you make your lead antagonist the father of your lead protagonist and no longer a random farm boy, you've closed the iris of storytelling and focused in on something rather contained. When you put your characters in real danger, peril, and nearly kill them, you are closing the iris a bit on your ability to expand your universe because at bare minimum, you will need to dedicate the majority of your next film to saving them. Regardless, those are the facts, and unless you want to just end up making a movie that would land in this essay, then the route to salvation and creating something actually original can be a mere step away. And isn't that ultimately what we want here? To shirk the negative and insidious history and almost inescapable cliches and boundaries that come with making a sequel? So then how? How do you make a sequel that isn't just The Empire Strikes Back and still make a movie worth standing on its own? It's gonna sound fucking insane, but there truly is a cure-all to this entire situation. You'll be able to create a sequel that will last throughout time instead of fizzling into dust. To create a movie that doesn't owe its entire DNA to the Empire, all you have to do is introduce something new. I'm not asking you to strip away your favorite characters or ships or member berries. I'm asking you to throw all of those things into the blender and then just add some new things along the way. Godfather 2 utilized characters, concepts, and drama that made the first film so great and then introduced something new. A prequel storyline running concurrent to the main plotline that acts as a gorgeous reflection of two different generations of Italian men struggling to make their name in the world. Predator 2 had the same general structure as the first, but it added new insight to the Predator culture and a new locale to add some serious variety into the mix. Kill Bill Volume 2 was an entirely different breath of fresh air from the first film, raising the emotional stakes and introducing so many new layers to both the bride's character and Bill as well. The entire film shifts tone, which I consider a new element to a more emotionally rooted drama revenge tale instead of an outright action spectacle. Tonal shifts can provide wonderful sequels in and of themselves, and it doesn't always need to go Empire dark to make some sort of impact. Evil Dead found rollicking success with its more comedic, more action-oriented entries, and as I mentioned before, Crank 2's embracing of schlock comedy and spectacle as a tonal shift gives the second film life and vibrancy that was barely hinted at in the first. Then, if all else fails and you still want to make a non-Empire sequel but also don't feel like making a whole new movie, you can simply take the James Cameron approach and make the same movie again and again and again, but up the stakes emotionally and in action set pieces. Aliens mirrors the plot of Alien to almost a T, but simply multiplies the threat and the scope of the film. T2 is so insanely close to T1 in structure and plot, but the introduction of new technology, a new villain, and higher emotional stakes for Sarah Connor by having a son to protect elevates the film entirely. I mean, we just collectively as a world gave James Cameron $1 billion directly into his pocket to remake Avatar, a movie that people didn't even like in the first place. And the sequel was better than the original solely on its higher emotional stakes, increased action, and a stronger focus on family dynamics. Either way, there are different drinks at the bar other than the Empire's elixir. But if you're willing to take risks, I know that's tough for you, but the rewards will be longer lasting than the Empire clones they're surrounded by. Take Ridley Scott's polarizing Prometheus for an example, a film that could have easily been a direct clone of Alien with updated effects, but instead opted for a route of originality, bringing in our Lord and Savior Damon Lindelof to turn a basic Alien clone script into one of the most challenging, magnificent, ingenious franchise entries of all time. I know some people hate this movie. I mean, nobody's perfect, but it opened up the door to lore in the Alien universe in ways that will forever change and enrich the franchise. And people will remember Prometheus, surely more than they remember Aliens clones like AVP 1 and 2. I think this is mostly evident in the fact that after Aliens fans got their panties in a twist over Prometheus, Ridley backpedaled and tried to appease them with an alien clone in Covenant. But while I adore that movie as well, it's nowhere near the experience that Prometheus is. It's always, always a good bet to introduce new elements into a dying franchise. And I don't mean slight variations or race-swapping John Connor into a lesbian cornrowed POC.
Shoot me, and we'll all be dead in 10 seconds. This is what Legion wants us to do. Kill each other. We should be fighting the machines.
What's the point? We can't win.
Legion didn't exist until humans created it. We made that thing. We can destroy it. Are we supposed to lie down and die because some machine decided it? Is that our fate? Well, fuck fate.
What I'm getting at is that you can't be afraid to change something fundamentally, either through shifting of tone, visuals, execution, or the core concept of the film itself. Risk is hard, and stepping out of the shadow of your own influences can be rough, but let's not support the vicious cycle that's been perpetuated since the 1700s when it comes to how we continue our stories. The Empire Strikes Back, while remaining a timeless classic and arguably the very best that Star Wars has to offer, is ultimately a film that spawned a litany of expectations, cliches, and bad faith writing gimmicks when it came to sequelizing stories. And it's these copyable precedents that have wreaked absolute havoc on filmmaking ever since. Just remember how moved, how inspired, how awestruck you were when you saw The Empire Strikes Back. Remember how it just somehow changed everything. Well, Hollywood has been trying to bottle that feeling up and resell it to you over and over again until every franchise you love has been darkened and deadened and laid bare. Now, as we stand before the moldering remains of Indiana Jones, the Marvel Universe, the DCEU, Star Trek, and Star Wars, we have to only wonder if something new, something truly original will finally break this vicious cycle. Until then, all we have is our sordid blockbuster history to gaze back upon, tracing the trail of damage and imitation across generations as we watch The Empire Strikes Back ruin every movie ever, forever. Hello, weary traveler. This is the end of episode 2 of the Movie Blues Show. If you want some more good content, make sure to check out the Movie Blues podcast on Spotify and iTunes. And also check out the first episode of the Movie Blues Show, which was on the show From and the many lost knockoffs over the past couple generations. Okay, thanks for tuning in. Catchphrase, goodbye.